I have presided over murder trials, cartel executions, child abductions, and crimes so cruel they hollowed out entire families. But there is only one case that still follows me home at night. One case where I remember staring at the defendant and thinking, this man is either completely innocent or far more dangerous than anyone in that courtroom realized. And believe me, by the end of that trial, even I questioned whether justice alone was enough. The case arrived on my bench in late October. Cold rain hammered the courthouse windows that morning. Reporters crowded the front steps before sunrise. By 8 a.m., every seat inside courtroom 6B was filled. I remember standing behind the courtroom doors before entering. My hand rested on the brass handle, and for reasons I still cannot fully explain, I hesitated. You learn certain instincts after decades on the bench, tiny things. The sound of a witness breathing, the way a defendant watches the jury, the silence before someone lies. Sometimes your instincts whisper before the facts arrive. That morning, mine were screaming. The defendant's name was Daniel Mercer, 38 years old, financial consultant. No prior criminal record, married for 11 years to a woman named Rebecca Mercer, and accused of murdering her younger sister, Olivia Bennett. The prosecution claimed Daniel orchestrated the entire killing with terrifying precision. The defense claimed Olivia's death was a tragic accident fueled by paranoia and family conflict. But that wasn't why the nation became obsessed with this trial. No, people became obsessed because of the video. A single 27-second video recovered from Olivia Bennett's phone 3 days after her death, a video the jury had not yet seen, a video I would later watch in complete silence while 16 grown adults inside my courtroom forgot how to breathe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. When I first saw Daniel Mercer enter my courtroom, nothing about him fit the image of a killer. That is exactly what unsettled me. He walked calmly beside his attorneys, hands folded neatly in front of him. Navy suit, clean haircut, expression controlled, too controlled. I noticed he made eye contact with everyone except Olivia's parents seated behind the prosecution table. Not once. In my experience, guilty people often overperform emotion. They cry too quickly, speak too dramatically. They want the room to feel their innocence. Daniel Mercer did the opposite. He behaved like a man attending a corporate meeting, measured, precise, cold. And then there was Rebecca, his wife, Olivia's older sister. I will never forget her face. She sat in the front row wearing a gray coat despite the warmth inside the courtroom. Her hands trembled constantly, not violently, just enough for someone observant to notice. People assume judges only listen to testimony. That's not true. We study human behavior. Every glance matters. Every silence matters. And Rebecca Mercer looked terrified of her own husband. The prosecution attorney, Michael Reeves, noticed it too. I could tell immediately Reeves was one of the sharpest prosecutors I had seen in years. Not theatrical, not loud. The dangerous ones rarely are. He stood slowly during opening statements and walked toward the jury with almost unsettling calmness. Then he said something I remember word for word. Some killers use weapons, some use fear, and some learn how to make fear look like love. The courtroom went silent. Daniel Mercer didn't react, not even a blink. That disturbed me more than anger would have. Reeves began building the timeline carefully. Olivia Bennett had moved into the Mercer's guest house 6 months before her death after losing her job in Seattle. According to friends, Olivia and Daniel clashed constantly. Olivia allegedly believed Daniel was controlling Rebecca emotionally and financially. There were reports of arguments. One neighbor claimed she heard Olivia screaming, "You're lying to her." Another claimed Daniel once told Olivia she was destroying this family. Still, none of that proved murder. Then Reeves introduced the first photographs from the crime scene. I watched jurors shift uncomfortably in their seats. The images showed Olivia's body recovered at the bottom of a cliffside trail near Blackwater Ridge Park. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma from the fall. At first glance, it appeared accidental, but prosecutors argued Daniel staged the scene. They claimed he drove Olivia there late at night after an argument and pushed her. The defense attorney, Christopher Hayes, immediately countered. And Hayes was good, very good. He stood with confidence I rarely saw in defense counsel facing national media pressure. "Ladies and gentlemen," he told the jury, "this case is built entirely on assumptions, emotional speculation, and a family tragedy the prosecution is desperate to transform into murder." Strong opening, effective. Several jurors nodded subtly. I noticed Daniel finally react for the first time then, a faint smile, tiny, barely visible. But I saw it, and something about that smile unsettled me deeply. Over the next 3 days, witness testimony painted a disturbing picture of the Mercer household. Friends described Rebecca becoming increasingly withdrawn after marrying Daniel. Coworkers testified Daniel monitored her spending. A former neighbor claimed Rebecca once appeared at her door crying before abruptly leaving when Daniel called her phone. Still, none of it directly connected to Olivia's death, and juries need evidence, not instincts. That is one of the hardest truths about justice. You may sense darkness in someone long before you can prove it. On the fourth day, Rebecca Mercer finally took the stand. I remember the atmosphere changing the moment she walked toward the witness box. Even the spectators leaned forward. Rebecca looked exhausted, pale, hollow-eyed, like someone who had not slept in weeks. Michael Reeves approached gently. "Mrs. Mercer, did your sister fear your husband?" The defense immediately objected. I sustained it. Reeves adjusted instantly. Smart prosecutor. "Did Olivia ever express concerns about your marriage?" Rebecca froze. And that's when I noticed Daniel. He wasn't looking at the prosecutor. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring directly at Rebecca. Completely motionless. I have seen intimidation before, gang members, violent offenders, abusive spouses, but there was something uniquely terrifying about the way Daniel Mercer watched his wife in that moment. No anger, no threat, just control. Rebecca swallowed hard before answering. "Yes." The courtroom shifted. She said Daniel controlled everything, Rebecca whispered. "Who I spoke to, where I went, what I spent." Hayes rose immediately. Objection. Character evidence. Overruled. Reeves continued carefully. "And did you agree with your sister?" Rebecca opened her mouth, then stopped. Her eyes moved toward Daniel again. I noticed her hands shaking harder now. And then something happened I still think about to this day. Rebecca looked directly at me, not the jury, not the attorneys, me, and I recognized that expression instantly. Fear mixed with desperation, the expression of someone silently asking for help. Years on the bench teach you how to identify liars, but they also teach you how to recognize trapped people, Rebecca finally answered. No, but she said it too late, too weakly, and the jury noticed every single one of them. That afternoon, court recessed early after an evidentiary dispute involving Olivia's recovered cell phone. The prosecution wanted to introduce newly extracted data. The defense fought aggressively to block it, aggressively enough that even I found it unusual, because until then, Hayes had projected confidence. Now he seemed nervous, very nervous. And when experienced defense attorneys become nervous, judges pay attention. That evening, I remained alone in chambers reviewing motions. Rain hit the courthouse windows again. I remember loosening my tie and reading through the digital forensics report one more time. Then I found a sentence buried near the bottom of the document. One sentence, 23 words. And the moment I read it, I understood why the defense was panicking. Recovered deleted media file, time-stamped 11:42 p.m., approximately 17 minutes before victim's estimated time of death. I stared at those words for a very long time, because according to Daniel Mercer's statement to police, he claimed Olivia was already dead by then, and suddenly the entire case changed. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what we would see when that deleted video was finally played inside my courtroom the next morning. I have replayed that video in my mind more times than I care to admit, not because it was graphic, not because it showed violence, but because of the voice. A terrified human voice can reveal truths no cross-examination ever could. And when Olivia Bennett's recording echoed through my courtroom the next morning, even the jury forgot to take notes. The courthouse was different that day. You could feel it before proceedings even began. Reporters lined the hallway shoulder to shoulder. Camera crews whispered near security checkpoints. Court officers moved with unusual tension. Word spread overnight that prosecutors had obtained new evidence, dangerous evidence. I entered the courtroom precisely at 9:00 a.m., but no one was speaking anymore. That silence told me everything. Daniel Mercer sat exactly as he had every previous day. Perfect posture, hands folded, answers calm. But after years on the bench, I noticed the smallest change immediately. His jaw was tighter. People think composure means absence of fear. That is incorrect. Real fear often becomes quieter. And Daniel Mercer looked like a man calculating outcomes. Rebecca Mercer appeared worse than before. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She avoided looking toward either table. Then Olivia's parents entered. I will never forget them, Harold and Susan Bennett. Parents forced to sit 10 feet away from the man accused of killing their youngest daughter. Harold walked with visible stiffness, like his entire body had aged 20 years during the trial. Susan clutched Olivia's photograph so tightly I thought the frame might crack. Judges are trained to maintain emotional distance, necessary distance. Without it, this job destroys you. But some mornings test that discipline. This was one of them. Michael Reeves stood first. Your Honor, he said carefully, the prosecution moves to admit People's Exhibit 42. The defense objected immediately. Christopher Hayes rose so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. Your Honor, this material lacks contextual foundation. We have authentication from digital forensics, Reeves interrupted. Hayes pressed harder than I expected. Too hard. That caught my attention. Experienced attorneys usually adapt when evidence is strong. Hayes instead looked almost desperate to stop the jury from seeing the file, and desperation inside a courtroom always carries meaning. I reviewed the admissibility one final time, then I looked toward the jury. Some appeared nervous already, others curious. One older juror gripped his pen tightly enough to whiten his knuckles. Finally, I gave the ruling. Exhibit 42 is admitted, and just like that, the atmosphere changed completely. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as prosecutors prepared the monitor. No one moved. No coughing, no whispers, only the faint hum of the projector. Then the screen flickered. At first, the footage was dark and shaky. A phone camera, someone walking quickly outside, heavy breathing wind, and then Olivia Bennett's face appeared briefly on screen. I heard an audible reaction from the gallery. She looked terrified, not emotional, not upset. Terrified people often misunderstand fear. Genuine fear has a distinct quality. It strips away performance, and Olivia Bennett was not acting. I'm recording this because if something happens to me, she whispered, breathing hard. It was him. Every juror froze, even Daniel Mercer stopped blinking. Olivia turned the phone slightly. Trees, darkness, a gravel trail. Then her voice again. He followed me out here. Christopher Hayes immediately objected. Hearsay, overruled. I remember Daniel looking at me then. For the first time in the trial, I saw emotion behind his eyes, not sadness, not panic. Anger, cold anger. The video continued. Olivia glanced over her shoulder repeatedly as she walked. Then she whispered something that changed the entire courtroom. Rebecca doesn't know what he really is. Silence, absolute silence. The jury stared at the screen without moving. I glanced toward Rebecca Mercer. She had begun crying silently into both hands. And still, the most disturbing part had not yet arrived. Olivia suddenly stopped walking. The camera shifted downward slightly. Her breathing accelerated. Then a man's voice emerged somewhere behind her. Calm, controlled. Olivia, every hair on my arm stood up. I cannot explain it any other way. Maybe because the voice carried no emotion whatsoever, no shouting, no rage, just calm pursuit. Predators often sound calm. That is something most people never realize. Olivia whispered, "Stay away from me." Then the voice again, "You're making this harder than it needs to be." At that moment, several jurors visibly recoiled. One woman near the back covered her mouth. The video shook violently as Olivia started running. Branches snapped, heavy breathing. Then suddenly, a scream, sharp, sudden. The recording cut to black, and the courtroom fell into complete silence. No one moved for nearly 5 seconds. I looked toward Daniel Mercer, still calm, still controlled, but now something else existed in his expression, calculation, as though he were reassessing every person inside that courtroom. Michael Reeves let the silence linger intentionally. Smart move. Silence can be more powerful than argument. Then Reeves spoke quietly. The prosecution calls Detective Laura Mitchell. Detective Mitchell had led the homicide investigation from the beginning. 30 years in law enforcement, methodical, unemotional, exactly the kind of witness juries trust. She explained how Olivia's phone had been damaged during the fall, delaying recovery of deleted media. Then Reeves asked the critical question. Detective, based on GPS data, where was the defendant's phone at the time this recording was made? Mitchell answered without hesitation. Approximately 70 yards from the victim. A murmur swept across the courtroom. Christopher Hayes objected again, attacking signal reliability and tower accuracy, reasonable strategy, but I could see the problem forming already. Individually, each piece of evidence could be challenged. Together, different story. That's how strong prosecutions are built, brick by brick. Mitchell continued, investigators also recovered surveillance footage from a gas station 20 miles from Blackwater Ridge Park. The timestamp showed Daniel Mercer purchasing bottled water and cleaning wipes less than an hour after Olivia's estimated death. Agony, not definitive, but psychologically devastating, especially combined with the video. Then Reeves delivered the question I knew was coming. Detective, during your interview with the defendant, did he state he had not seen Olivia that night? Yes. And according to digital evidence, Mitchell looked directly toward the jury. That statement was false. Christopher Hayes stood immediately for cross-examination. And this was where the trial became truly fascinating, because Hayes did not behave like a losing attorney. He behaved like a man protecting something larger. I noticed it instantly. He approached Detective Mitchell slowly. Detective, Did investigators ever recover fingerprints, DNA, or direct forensic evidence proving my client pushed Olivia Bennett? No. Any eyewitnesses? No. Any recording of physical violence? No. Hayes nodded calmly, then he turned toward the jury. So despite weeks of investigation, the state cannot prove what actually happened on that cliff. Powerful point. Several jurors shifted uncertainly. Reasonable doubt had entered the room again, and Hayes knew it. Then he attacked the video itself. Detective, fear can influence perception, correct? Yes. People experiencing emotional distress can make assumptions. Yes. Olivia Bennett never states on video that Daniel Mercer attacked her. Correct? Mitchell paused. Correct. That pause mattered. I watched the jury carefully. Some were pulling back emotionally now. This is why courtroom trials are psychological warfare. Every inch of momentum matters. Every doubt matters. Then Hayes delivered the line that changed the trajectory of the entire defense. Isn't it true Olivia Bennett had a documented history of anxiety and paranoid behavior? The prosecution objected instantly, but I allowed limited questioning due to prior evidentiary rulings, and that's when the courtroom atmosphere turned darker. Because Hayes wasn't really defending Daniel Mercer anymore, he was beginning to dismantle Olivia Bennett herself. He introduced therapy records, text messages, witnesses describing Olivia as obsessive and emotionally unstable. Classic strategy. Dangerous strategy. Sometimes defense attorneys put victims on trial instead of defendants. I've seen it countless times. Said something about Hayes' aggression bothered me deeply, not legally, personally. He pushed too hard. Almost like he needed the jury to hate Olivia. And when attorneys need jurors emotionally manipulated that badly, there is usually something else they fear. Then came the moment I still cannot fully explain. During a brief recess, Rebecca Mercer approached the bench unexpectedly while deputies escorted jurors out. She looked pale, terrified. "Your Honor," she whispered, barely audible. "He knows something." I frowned slightly. "Mrs. Mercer, you need to speak through counsel." Her breathing quickened. "You don't understand," she said. "Daniel already knows what they found. I asked the obvious question." "How?" Rebecca looked over her shoulder toward the defense table. Then she said 7 words that chilled me instantly. "Because someone inside this courtroom told him." And before I could respond, she looked directly at defense attorney Christopher Hayes. "I have spent 26 years listening to criminals explain themselves. Most lie, some cry, a few confess. But only one defendant ever looked directly at me after his world collapsed and smiled as though the trial was finally becoming interesting. That defendant was Daniel Mercer, and what happened after his statement nearly destroyed everyone involved in the case. The courtroom remained frozen after his words. You still don't know what actually happened that night. I remember hearing someone in the gallery whisper, "My God." Deputies positioned themselves beside Daniel immediately, but he showed no resistance, no panic, no anger, just that same terrifying calm. Manipulative personalities often believe they are the smartest people in every room, but truly dangerous ones, they enjoy proving it, and Daniel Mercer looked like a man preparing to reveal something. I ordered the jury removed temporarily while counsel approached the bench. Chaos erupted instantly once jurors exited. Michael Reeves demanded Daniel be remanded without further bail consideration. Christopher Hayes, visibly unraveling now, insisted his client was being prejudged emotionally rather than legally, but Hayes no longer looked like a defense attorney in control of a case. He looked like a man realizing he had attached himself to something monstrous. Then Daniel interrupted everyone quietly. "You're all missing the point." The courtroom fell silent again. I should tell you something important here. Judges are trained never to engage emotionally with defendants during proceedings. Distance preserves objectivity, but Daniel Mercer tested that discipline constantly because every sentence from him felt calculated to provoke psychological reaction. He looked directly at Rebecca first. "You told them about the camera." Rebecca began crying again. Daniel nodded slowly. "I wondered when you'd finally break." That sentence disturbed even the deputies standing near him, not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded disappointed, as though her fear had inconvenienced him personally. Then he turned toward me. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "I'd like to testify." Christopher Hayes spun around immediately. "No." Daniel ignored him completely. "I want the jury to hear the truth. Years on the bench teach you when attorneys are afraid of testimony." Hayes was terrified, and suddenly I understood something critical. Christopher Hayes had not been protecting Daniel Mercer because he believed he was innocent. He had been protecting himself. Those offshore payments, the evidence leaks, the desperation. Hayes knew damaging information long before the prosecution uncovered it. And now his client was becoming unpredictable, dangerous territory. I recessed court for lunch before ruling on Daniel's request, but I barely touched my food inside chambers. Instead, I reviewed every behavioral note I'd written since the trial began. Daniel never reacted emotionally to Olivia's death, never expressed grief, never asked about her family, never denied fearing exposure. Only one thing consistently affected him: loss of control. That pattern matters because in abuse cases, control is often the true addiction, not violence control. When proceedings resumed, the courtroom was overflowing beyond capacity. Reporters stood along walls. Additional deputies arrived. The atmosphere felt less like a trial and more like a bomb waiting to detonate. I allowed Daniel Mercer to testify against counsel's recommendation. Christopher Hayes looked physically ill. Daniel took the witness stand calmly, no hesitation, no visible fear. Then Michael Reeves began. Mr. Mercer, did you kill Olivia Bennett? Daniel smiled faintly. No. Did you threaten her? She was emotionally unstable. Classic deflection. Reeves pressed harder. She accused you repeatedly of controlling your wife. Daniel shrugged slightly. Rebecca needed structure. I saw several jurors react instantly to that word, structure, not support, not guidance. Structure. Psychology often hides inside vocabulary. Reeves noticed too. And what exactly did that structure involve? Daniel leaned back slightly. Managing finances, scheduling, household expectations. Reeves stepped closer, monitoring her phone. Silence, tracking her location. Silence again, recording conversations. Daniel finally answered, I protected my marriage. That line sent visible discomfort across the jury box because everyone understood what he really meant: control disguised as protection. Then Reeves shifted direction suddenly. Tell us about the night Olivia died. For the first time, Daniel hesitated, tiny pause, but enough. She called Rebecca repeatedly that evening, he said. She sounded paranoid, accusatory. Did you meet her at Blackwater Ridge Park? Yes. A ripple swept through the courtroom. This was the first direct contradiction of his original police statement. Reeves moved immediately. So you lied to investigators. I omitted details. Why? Daniel's expression darkened slightly. Because I knew how this would look. Smart answer, generously smart. Then Reeves delivered the question that changed everything. What happened on the cliff? And suddenly, Daniel Mercer's composure shifted, not broken, sharp or colder. He looked toward the jury carefully before answering. Olivia was trying to destroy my marriage, he said. She manipulated Rebecca for months. Did you push her? No. Then explain the video. Daniel folded his hands. She recorded me following her because she wanted evidence. She was obsessed. Reeves fired back instantly. She sounded terrified. She enjoyed drama. That sentence nearly caused Olivia's mother to scream from the gallery. Court officers intervened immediately, but I kept watching Daniel because he wasn't speaking like a grieving man defending himself. He was speaking like someone dissecting a problem, clinical, detached. And then Reeves revealed the final piece. Mr. Mercer, are you aware the prosecution recovered deleted security footage from your garage? For the first time in the entire trial. Daniel blinked rapidly. There it was. Real surprise, real fear. Christopher Hayes closed his eyes immediately, almost like a man awaiting impact. Reeves approached the evidence monitor slowly. Footage timestamped 43 minutes before Olivia Bennett's death. The screen illuminated, black and white garage footage appeared, Rebecca's SUV parked inside. Olivia visible near the driver's side. Then Daniel entered frame. The argument had no audio, but the body language alone was explosive. Olivia pointing aggressively, Daniel moving closer, Rebecca attempting to separate them. Then suddenly, Daniel shoved Rebecca violently into the garage wall. The courtroom erupted. Rebecca covered her mouth in horror. Several jurors physically recoiled. But the truly devastating moment came seconds later. Olivia stepped between them, and Daniel struck her across the face hard. The impact sent Olivia crashing against the SUV. Gasps exploded everywhere. Even deputies looked shaken. Michael Reeves paused the footage there, frozen frame. Daniel Mercer standing over Olivia with absolute fury in his face, not calm anymore, not composed, exposed. And that's when the prosecution destroyed him completely. Mr. Mercer, Reeves said quietly, would you like the jury to see the remaining 6 minutes? Daniel's confidence vanished, not dramatically, worse, silently. Predators fear exposure more than punishment because exposure destroys the identity they built, the illusion, and Daniel Mercer realized the illusion was dying in real time. Hayes stood suddenly. Your Honor, my client wishes to amend his testimony. Reeves smiled slightly. Too late. I allowed continuation. Daniel looked exhausted now, not emotionally, strategically. Cornered minds become dangerous. Then he said the words that stunned everyone. I didn't mean for her to fall. Complete silence. Rebecca began sobbing uncontrollably. Jurors stared at Daniel like strangers finally seeing his real face. Reeves approached carefully. You pushed Olivia Bennett? Daniel shook his head slowly. She attacked me first. Classic minimization, even then, even trapped beneath overwhelming evidence. He continued trying to preserve control over the narrative. Then came the final revelation. And believe me, nothing in my career prepared me for it. Reeves displayed a forensic enhancement of the final seconds from Olivia's cell phone recording, audio clean, brutal, isolated. The courtroom listened carefully as Olivia screamed. Then Daniel's voice emerged clearly behind her, cold, calm, deadly. No one will believe you. A sound escaped from the gallery I still remember. Not a gasp, not a cry, something deeper. The sound human beings make when evil finally removes its mask. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time since the trial began, he looked defeated, not remorseful, defeated. There's a difference, a profound difference. I dismissed court early that evening because several jurors were emotionally overwhelmed. But before deputies escorted Daniel out, he turned toward Rebecca one final time and quietly said, "You should have trusted me." Even now, those words haunt me more than the confession itself because they revealed everything. To Daniel Mercer, love meant obedience, trust meant silence, and control meant ownership. The next morning, I would sentence him, but what Rebecca Mercer revealed to me privately before sentencing would change how I understood this entire case forever. I have delivered hundreds of sentences in my career. Some felt procedural, some felt tragic, a few felt righteous. But only once have I looked down at a defendant and realized the courtroom had barely stopped something far worse from happening. That realization came the morning I sentenced Daniel Mercer. And even now, years later, I still think about what Rebecca Mercer told me before I entered that courtroom. I arrived at chambers before sunrise. The courthouse was already surrounded by media trucks. Reporters crowded the sidewalks despite freezing rain. Nationwide headlines had transformed the case into a public obsession overnight. Controlled, use banned, convicted. The Blackwater Ridge Killer, the video that shocked the courtroom. But the public still didn't understand the most disturbing part of the case because the real horror was never the murder alone. It was how close Daniel Mercer came to getting away with it. People imagine dangerous individuals as obvious monsters, violent, chaotic, easy to identify. Reality is far more unsettling. The most manipulative people often appear disciplined, intelligent, charming, dependable. They build trust carefully, then weaponize it quietly. Daniel Mercer understood human psychology with frightening precision. That was what kept me awake at night. At 7:40 a.m., before sentencing began, Rebecca Mercer requested a private judicial meeting with attorneys present, standard precautions. She entered chambers looking completely different from the woman I first saw during trial, still exhausted, still grieving, but no longer afraid, and there is something powerful about watching fear finally leave someone's eyes. She carried a small cardboard box in both hands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed it on the table. I found these after the trial, she whispered. Inside were dozens of notebooks, meticulously organized, dates, times, schedules. Every movement Rebecca made over nearly 7 years of marriage had been documented by Daniel Mercer upon calls, gas purchases, conversations, arguments, expenses, even emotional reactions. One page stopped me cold. Rebecca cried after speaking to Olivia today. Possible loyalty issue developing. I remember staring at those words for a long moment, not because they sounded angry, because they sounded clinical, like observations from a scientist studying behavior. Rebecca swallowed hard before continuing. He used to say relationships fail because people stop managing them correctly. Managing them, not loving them, managing them. Then she revealed something that shook everyone in chambers. 3 months before Olivia's death, Daniel Mercer had purchased property in another state under a false LLC, large rural property isolated, and investigators later discovered survival supplies stored there, generators, fuel, unregistered firearms, enough provisions for nearly a year. The room became completely silent. Michael Reeves leaned forward slowly. You think he planned to disappear? Rebecca looked down at the floor. No, she whispered. I think he planned to take me with him. I felt a genuine chill hearing those words, because suddenly the entire case transformed in my mind. Olivia Bennett had not simply threatened Daniel Mercer's reputation, she threatened his control. And manipulative people often escalate dangerously when they sense control slipping away. Rebecca continued, speaking softly. Olivia kept telling me something was wrong. I thought she was overreacting. Tears formed again, but she saw him clearly long before I did. That sentence stayed with me because victims inside controlling relationships often normalize behavior gradually. The manipulation becomes incremental, invisible, until someone outside the system notices the danger. Olivia noticed, and it cost her life. At 9 a.m., I entered the courtroom for sentencing. I have rarely felt tension like that room carried. Every seat filled, complete silence. Daniel Mercer stood at the defense table in county custody uniform now instead of tailored suits. But strangely, he still carried himself with composure. That disturbed me because some people remain emotionally detached even when their entire lives collapse. Not due to strength, due to absence of empathy. Christopher Hayes looked destroyed professionally and personally. Bar investigations had already begun regarding misconduct allegations tied to the trial. He barely spoke. Daniel requested permission to address the court before sentencing. I granted it, and what he said revealed more about human darkness than any evidence presented during the trial. He stood slowly, looked directly toward the jury first, then Olivia's parents, then Rebecca, finally me. I know everyone here wants remorse, he said calmly, but remorse doesn't change outcomes. No emotion, no grief, only cold analysis. I made mistakes. Mistakes, that word triggered visible outrage throughout the courtroom. Not murder, not violence, my mistakes, Daniel continued. People are emotional. They exaggerate fear. Olivia escalated conflict constantly. Even then, even after conviction, he continued blaming the victim. That is another truth many people fail to understand about manipulative personalities. Some never truly believe they are wrong. They simply believe they lost. Daniel looked toward Rebecca again. I tried to build a stable life for you. Rebecca started crying silently. But you listen to weak people, not concerned people, not loving people, weak people. Everything in Daniel Mercer's worldview revolved around dominance and control. Then he said something that made the courtroom collectively uneasy. If Olivia had walked away that night, none of this would have happened. There it was, the final mask removed completely, not accountability, not remorse. Responsibility transferred onto the victim herself. Even now, remembering it makes my stomach tighten. I began sentencing immediately afterward. And I spoke longer than I usually do, because some cases require more than punishment. They require recognition of truth. I remember every word. Mr. Mercer, this court has observed not merely acts of violence, but a sustained pattern of psychological domination, manipulation, coercion, and calculated intimidation. Daniel remained expressionless. You viewed human beings as possessions to manage rather than lives to respect. Silence filled the courtroom. You murdered Olivia Bennett because she threatened your control over Rebecca Mercer. And even now, you continue minimizing the destruction you caused. I looked toward Olivia's parents, then Rebecca, then back to Daniel. In 26 years on this bench, few defendants have concerned me the way you do, not because of rage, but because of your absence of conscience, complete silence. Then I imposed sentence, life imprisonment without possibility of parole. No reaction. That's what unsettled me most. Daniel Mercer simply nodded once, as though acknowledging a business transaction. Deputies moved to escort him away. Then suddenly, he stopped walking and turned toward me one final time. You know what the worst part is, Judge? The courtroom froze again. Daniel smiled faintly. She almost stayed. Even now, I can still hear those words. She almost stayed, not because she loved him, because fear had nearly trapped her permanently. That was the true horror of the case, not merely murder control so powerful it nearly erased someone's ability to escape. Daniel Mercer disappeared through the courtroom doors moments later, and just like that, it was over, or at least legally over. But certain trials never really leave you. People ask judges whether cases become easier over time. The answer is no. You simply become better at carrying them. Yet some remain heavier than others. This one stayed with me because it exposed something deeply uncomfortable about human nature. Evil does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it arrives smiling, polite, educated, patient. And by the time people recognize the danger, they are already trapped inside it. A year after sentencing, Rebecca Mercer sent me a letter, short-silled. She wrote, Olivia saved my life. I just understood it too late. I kept that letter. Still have it because beneath all the legal arguments, forensic evidence, and courtroom drama, that sentence captured the entire truth. Olivia Bennett died trying to pull her sister out of darkness, and in the end, she succeeded, but at a terrible cost. I have presided over hundreds of cases since then, yet every so often, when a defendant enters my courtroom too calm, too controlled, too rehearsed, AP. Remember Daniel Mercer. And I remind myself of something this case taught me forever. The most dangerous people are often the ones who know exactly how to appear harmless. And believe me, that realization changes the way you look at the world forever.